from a singular indigenous source from Malampaya to a possible importing possible importation of natural gas here in our country. So we're now transitioning to that. So we need to make sure that we have the laws, the regulations, and very clear rules and regulation in order for a vibrant development of this industry. We've been approached by many proponents. All they want is very clear rules and regulation and very clear laws so that they'll be guided accordingly. With that, we'll start off with the pending items from the last hearing. We have a few items that we requested, and we want DOE to clarify. You sent us a position paper to that effect, but we want to discuss it so that we will put that on record. One of the important questions that we threw back to the DOE is the price of electricity. To date, the biggest off-taker of natural gas will be the power plants. And the power plants obviously will sell to the utilities, and the utilities will pass it on to the consumers. So at the end, it will be the consumers that will be bearing the cost of this natural gas, at least in the initial phase, dahil wala pa tayong transportation and other industry. But the initial phase, and I think that is also reflected in the position paper of the DOE, in the initial phase, the power sector will be the ultimate user of the natural gas that will be imported here in our country. So ang tanong ho namin is, what will be the effect of the importation of natural gas in our electricity prices, and what will be the effect of building a terminal vis-a-vis as opposed to, let's say, the other type of importation strategies such as FSRU to the electricity prices. At the end, we want to know very clearly from today's hearing is ano ba ang epekto nito sa presyo ng kuryente natin. Bababa, tataas, nothing will happen. What will be the effect of a natural gas or downstream natural gas industry to our electricity prices? So we want to, ASEC, you sent us a position paper, but it's better to discuss it so that it will be put in record.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. We'd like to take this opportunity, Mr. Chair, to share our position paper that we submitted to the committee by sharing with you our opening statement, which essentially summarizes the contents of the position paper that we submitted. Magandang umaga po. Good morning to everybody who's here, to our stakeholders, to the members of the Energy family, and to Chairman Gatchalian of the Committee on Energy. The Department of Energy wishes to express its appreciation for the Committee on Energy support for the Philippine downstream natural gas industry and the opportunity to share its insights on Senate Bill number 765, which, if passed, would lay down the legislative framework for the development of said industry. According to reports provided to us, the Malampaya gas field has begun depletion since 2015. Considering that it provides fuel to generate 3,200 megawatts, it is of course imperative to provide an alternative supply. We believe that the most dependable option is to import liquefied natural gas. It is hoped that integrating this option in the draft bill would increase the country's supply base for natural gas, thereby ensuring energy security and enabling the development of the nascent natural gas industry. The department further proposes the following policies. Hopefully that we could expound on these policies in the draft bill. We would like to see a promotion of natural gas as an energy fuel with a remarkable potential to satisfy increasing local demand and that of the Asia-Pacific region, with the hope that the Philippines could be a hub for LNG trading and transshipment. Promotion of conversion of existing liquid petroleum fuel-operated power plants, machines, and industrial facilities for natural gas. Promote the allocation or sourcing by distribution utilities of power supply from gas-fired power plants. Ensure access and financial viability of the Philippine downstream natural gas industry value chain by liberalizing entry under a system of competition, transparency, and fair trade with the end goal of attaining fair price for all stakeholders. Anticipate mitigating measures to factor in the increased regulatory risks. It's one of the concerns that the department has, which is that too much regulatory intervention would probably scare away certain investors. Provide for funding mechanisms for anchor pipeline projects, such as gas transmission pipelines, to enable the government to catalyze the development of the gas industry should private entities be unwilling to take the full risk of investing in facilities in an emerging market. In as much as the DOE wanted to submit, Mr. Chair, we were actually working on a draft bill, an amended version of Senate Bill number 756. And in as much as we wanted to submit it today, we would like to ask for more time. We would like to integrate the PDGNR and some of the other bills that we've seen into the Senate bill. And we were hoping as well to discuss it further at this hearing. In the meantime, we wish to submit our initial position on one of the key issues in the bill, which involves the delineation of functions between the DOE and the ERC. The DOE fully concurs with the allocation of functions between the Energy Regulatory Commission and the department, with the DOE assuming entry regulation and non-price regulation, while ERC would be taking charge of price regulation. Vesting the DOE with the power to issue permits and supervise the facilities that have been granted permits, including construction, expansion, rehabilitation, modification, operation, and maintenance of facilities for the transmission, distribution, and supply of natural gas, will complement the agency's policy planning and planning-making functions. The DOE believes that such arrangement is particularly appropriate at this developmental stage of the gas industry, as it will facilitate the coordination of investments, not only within the gas industry itself, but also with other subsectors therein, particularly the power generation market, which is actually the main market for natural gas in the near future. From the security of supply perspective, this will enable the DOE to facilitate the availability of natural gas, to address the impending power shortage in the short run, and ultimately promote diversification and reliability of energy supply in the country. Again, Mr. Chair, we look forward to working with your committee and further developing the legislative framework for the country's nascent downstream natural gas industry. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ASEC. You sent us a document, no? This is actually in reply to the pending issues or the pending questions from last hearing. And hindi ko lang nalagay ito sa PowerPoint, but I don't know, do you have a PowerPoint presentation for this para makita rin ng lahat?
Apologies, Mr. Chair. There's supposed to be a short presentation, but our team has not arrived yet. Our full team has not arrived yet. Director Rino Abad of the YMB, who supposedly has the PowerPoint
Well,
presentation.
anyways, I want to discuss this with the body, no, because a lot of the stakeholders are here, no, and based on your report to us, just to summarize everything, no, and to make it very clear, on a per kilowatt hour computation, the Malampaya is costing us about 4.67 pesos per kilowatt hour. Coal is much more expensive at 5.49 pesos per kilowatt hour. But imported natural gas or imported LNG will cost us in the future about 4.53 pesos per kilowatt hour. So, in effect, based on your study, an imported LNG is much cheaper to the prevailing coal price and to the prevailing Malampaya prices. No? This is an analysis from your office. And can you elaborate further on this one, ASEC? How did you arrive on this 4.53 pesos per kilowatt hour?
Mr. Chair, the team that came up with the computation is the team that's late, unfortunately.
Pupunta ba sila?
Yes, Mr. Chair, they're on their way. Earlier, they said they were about 15 to 20 minutes late. We
Well,
apologize for...
I really hope this is correct, no? Because and accurate, because from this presentation, lumalabas sa mas mura mag-import. So kung nag-import tayo ngayon ng LNG, mas mura pa siya kaysa sa Malampaya, no? So once again, importing LNG seems like it's the best option for the consumers, no? If I go by this computation, no? But I want to understand completely this computation. Ito ba, did this take into account building an onshore terminal? What type of infrastructure was put in place to get this computation, so that everyone will be enlightened how this pricing came about, no? So kasi this will dictate and rationalize why we are all here and pushing for the development of a downstream natural gas industry, no? This is actually one of the most compelling reasons, because mas mura siya pag nag-import. But then again, we have to understand also kung paano nyo na compute to, because to be honest about it, I've talked to many natural gas developers, and most of the computations I've seen, including our internal computation, mas mahal ang imported natural gas, no? That's why a lot of the developers are saying it's only natural gas is only fit for certain demand uses, no, which is mid-merit and peaking, no? But in this case, even base load, parang mas mura siya, no? So we want to understand kung paano nakuha itong computation. Diyan ba? Papunta na ba sila? Can you explain this, or you want to wait for Director?
Mr. Chair, we'd rather wait. Apologies, Mr. Chair. You have me at a disadvantage. I don't have a copy of that study. It was Director Rino Abad who submitted that.
Okay. Well, is he coming?
He's coming, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
sige,
We
antayin na lang
apologize.
natin, because kung ganito, I'm sure matutuwa si Attorney Dimagi ba dahil mas mura eh. But we don't really know kung ano yung kasama nito. Kasama ba, is this an onshore terminal? Are we building a pipe? We really need to understand, no?
To be perfectly honest, Mr. Chair, from the figures that you've read, I'm also a little concerned. So I'd rather
Yeah.
explain.
And again, I've got briefing from many conglomerates, many big players, including Shell, actually, who pointed out that it's still quite expensive right now,
Yes,
but it has a special use,
Yes, Mr. Chair.
admittedly. No?
And
So-
actually, Mr. Chair, that's what we. If you would give me the opportunity to explain, from a policy perspective, of course, the Department of Energy is looking into the importation of LNG. Principally, the principal consideration really is for supply security, and the costing that you read off does not reflect what we at the policy level are aware of. So I'd rather wait for, you have met at a disadvantage, Mr. I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of that study. But again, the focus really for the importation is supply security. And we understand that there are price considerations, but those data submitted to you might not be fully accurate. So we'd like him to explain.
Attorney, were you raising your hands? Or?
Yeah, because siguro, Mr. Chairman, may representative naman yung Meralco rito ngayon. No? Maybe we can ask them how much they're paying Malampaya now.
Actually, this took into account the Meralco. This is
that the
actually
Meralco
taken from
rate,
the Meralco website, but unfortunately, Meralco is not here with us today.
Yeah,
So,
because may binasa po kayo, parang hindi yata ako naniniwala doon na coal is more expensive than Malampaya. All the while, I've been hearing and reading that coal is the cheapest energy resource in the country today. Maybe baka po itong mga taga First Gen tsaka itong SMC Global can share your ideas now while waiting for...
Anyone wants to comment on the pricing?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jerome from First Gen. So First Gen owns and operates four or five actually of the 6 users of Malampaya gas. Electricity produced from Malampaya gas now is really and has been for the past couple of years cheaper than coal, even on base load. And this can be very easily verified by looking at the Meralco website. Meralco publishes the rates that they're buying their electricity from their various contracts. And if you look at each of the power plants and compare electricity, the tariff for electricity produced from gas versus electricity produced from coal, those products are a bit cheaper.
And the use is for which demand requirement?
Mr. Chairman, this is for baseload operations. Santa Rita, San Lorenzo, Ilihan power plants have been operating on baseload as
So
well.
what First Gen is saying, mas mura siya sa coal at nagagamit pa for baseload.
Mas mura siya, Your Honor, Mr. Chairman, on coal versus coal on baseload. No?
On
Definitely
baseload.
cheaper mid-merit and peaking, but even on baseload now, and last couple of years they've been cheaper.
So there's no price penalty to use gas for baseload. Alam ko kaya technically, but there's always a price penalty for that, no?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, for the as we mentioned, for the past couple of years, Malampaya gas, electricity from Malampaya gas have been cheaper than those from coal.
Do you want to comment po on the pricing that with the importation of LNG, it will still come down cheaper than Malampaya?
Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of the study that was done by the DOE, but so I'm not aware of the details of the study done by the DOE, but based on our assessment, that is not far-fetched. The existing gas facilities have lots of advantages over right now. Number one being they've been operating for more than 20 years now. So by the time that we use LNG for these facilities, then we would have had to spend only very minimal capex to extend the life, make sure that they can operate as efficiently and as effectively on LNG. And I would assume that that would already include the terminal cost of putting up the terminal as well. So it's not, I don't see it as impossible. And it's also, if you look at coal prices now, coal prices fluctuate like gas and oil prices. And at current coal prices, it wouldn't be surprising that it would really be much more expensive to generate electricity from coal.
In your experience po, imported LNG can be lower than the prevailing prices right now here in our country.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Especially looking at the price of LNG now internationally and looking at the prices of coal.
Okay, so we'll elaborate that and go deeper when the DOE officials come in. Mr. Elliott, do you want to contribute?
Mr. Chairman, you may recall at the last hearing I was actually able to present a slide which shows our anticipated cost of power generation using imported LNG at the Pagbalao hub terminal and power station, which we have constructed here in the Philippines. To give you a little bit of a breakdown, our estimated cost of sales going out the door is actually 2 pesos 75 centavos per kilowatt hour. That breaks down to approximately 75 centavos are required to repay the capital cost and debt servicing on the power station. Approximately 40 to 45 centavos per kilowatt hour are required for the fixed and variable operating cost of the power station. The fuel cost is approximately 1.56 pesos per kilowatt hour. Now that was based on a relatively low LNG price, but those are achievable prices in the market today. And that gives a total price of, as I said, 2 pesos 75 centavos. Included in the fuel cost is paying the tolling fee of the terminal, which finances the construction of the terminal. So those are the numbers that we have published for the project here in the Philippines. So we understand and we are confident that we can provide all levels of power generation, including baseload, and we know that we can compete with coal into the Philippine market, and we actually see that the price of electricity in the Philippines should come down dramatically in the future as more affordable energy sources are brought in and the existing direct system of point-to-point contracts is moved to the wholesale market model.
Mr. Elliott, let me just repeat it once more. What you're saying is at the current prevailing prices right now, EWC can sell electricity at 2 pesos and 75 pesos per kilowatt hour. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So even much lower than the estimate of DOE, which is about 4 pesos and 53 pesos per kilowatt hour. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And definitely your prices is way much lower than the prevailing coal prices right now, no? Which
Yes.
is 5.49. This is I believe this is an average that DOE computed using the Meralco pricing. No? So what's holding you back? No, I mean that's fantastic. If you can sell tomorrow at 2 pesos per 2 pesos and 75 centavos, then you're basically giving the Filipino consumers a lot of savings. So what's holding back EWC? Actually, that's my question towards the end. But since you opened it up already, so what's holding back EWC? Because the consumer groups will be static.
The delay has been as a result of being able to connect to the grid infrastructure.
Which is NGCP.
Combination of NGCP, Transco, and we're currently going through some petitions with the Energy Regulatory Commission.
So where is the delay right now? If you can narrow it down to very specific items, because if your statement is true that you can essentially cut down generation prices by almost half, then it's to the interest of this committee to assist you in selling that electricity to the market, because that will in effect help all of us, no? Bring down our electricity costs, assuming that your computation is accurate. Well, and
we have constructed the terminal and we have constructed the power station. The first 2 units are on site and ready for commissioning. Just let me refer to, this was in the presentation that I presented at the last hearing. So it was actually as early as June of 2013 that we applied and received permission from the Department of Energy for applying for transmission services. We made that application, and in December of 2015, we were offered a connection agreement from NGCP, and in the intervening time, rather than connect to the existing infrastructure, which had spare capacity that passes within about 500 meters of our power station, NGCP would only give us an option to connect at a new and as yet unbuilt substation, which is about 14 kilometers away from the site. So we have been, since that period, trying to negotiate a connection at the local point. That capacity has been taken up by the expansion of the existing coal-fired power station. So that there is still, however, about 200 megawatts of capacity available. But now, finally, at the end of October last year, the NGCP were able to tell us the location of the new substation, at which point we were able to enter into a land agreement to purchase and obtain the right-of-way necessary, which we believe we have now secured, and we are actually finalizing meetings with the land agent tomorrow. So now we are full speed ahead in constructing that transmission line. But really it took from our application in 2013 until October of 2017 to get a confirmed point of where we could connect.
Let's break it down in very simple terms so that the committee can assist you in facilitating that 2 pesos and 75 centavos into the grid, because again, no, that will help us a lot in bringing down the prices. So where's the problem in connecting with NGCP?
We hope we've solved that problem.
So that problem is already solved.
It's taken 4 years to solve, but we believe we've now solved it.
Okay, and then what else?
Then the other issue was that we were relying on the Development Bank of the Philippines and Land Bank of the Philippines, who as development banks have been very supportive to lend to the project on commercial terms. However, the uncertainty in the connection meant that although we had a financing package agreed back in 2015, they have been unwilling to release any funding on that until the connection issue was resolved. So we also see that moving forward at the moment.
Okay, and then what else? That's it?
Those are the only...
With ERC and DOE, or you're being assisted?
We've been very well assisted all the way through with the Department of Energy, and they've been very supportive of the project. So, you know, we really just want to see it finished, and we want to see it up and running, and then we would like to see expansion on the site with additional power stations.
So with the substation and the connection to NGCP has already been solved, what's the timetable that you're looking at to sell electricity to the grid?
At the moment, we are looking at being online about the end of this year.
End of this year.
That's our target. And obviously subject to moving forward. The substation will not be complete until, at the moment, I've been told, very end of 2019 or early 2020, which means we can't export the full 650 megawatts of power until that period.
But
So
end of the year, you can sell electricity
we
to the
can
grid.
start selling electricity up to about 200 megawatts out of the 650.
Right, because that's, again, no, that's fantastic news for the consumers, because if you look at the computation, at the prevailing coal prices right now, you're basically saying that you can sell half, no,
Yes.
of the coal prices. No? And of course, I think we already established that natural gas is a much cleaner source. No?
That is correct. It's a much cleaner source. There's about 1/3 of the emissions per kilowatt hour.
Okay.
And there is none of the residual ash with the associated heavy metals and radioactive
Well,
elements.
let us know. No, well, DOE, we have a representative here from NGCP. We also have some people from ERC, I believe. No, just let us know how we can assist EWC, because it's like I said, no, our interest is to see prices of generation cost go down, no? And this is actually one way of making sure that it's going down.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's also our intention, is to bring clean and affordable energy to the Philippines.
All right. ASEC, are you ready to discuss the pricing?
Apologies, Mr. Chair. Director Rino Abad is the one who's supposed to be explaining the pricing mechanism. Could we discuss the policies first? Apologies, Mr. Chair. He
Well,
said he's about 10 minutes
Okay,
away.
we'll skip that for now, no? But
Well, we can come back for it,
uh,
Mr. Chair, once
we'll
it comes
go
up.
to the extension of the Malampaya concession.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And I believe that the target date for that extension is 2020.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
No, I believe. However, with that statement, I also talked to some of the existing power generators, and to them, to have certainty today is the best case for them, no, to move forward. Because kung aantayin pa natin ng 2020, obviously that will also affect the supply of LNG to their power plants. So what they have through their position paper, what they told us is the uncertainty between now and 2024 or 2020, for this matter, is not beneficial to them. Ngayon, we also understand, I think yesterday, si Yusek Marcos came up with a statement wherein DOE is also looking at taking over, no, the
Through
contract.
PNOCEC, Mr. Chair.
No, through PNOCEC. So this is actually a divergent from what was mentioned in the past hearing of the potential extension. So can you again, no, elaborate on this new statement of Yusek Marcos wherein PNOCEC will take over, and ano ba yung activities, no, in relation to this takeover of the contract?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Currently, Mr. Chair, there's a team within the Department of Energy composed of several of our bureaus and divisions, which is currently studying which is tasked to come up with a recommendation to the Secretary. And part of that, part of the mandate of the Secretary is to consider various options and alternatives. The statement of Yusek Marcos reflects one of the ideas that was propounded by our team, and that idea was in order to, in the hopes of further developing our indigenous natural gas sector. Of course, that's dependent on what would happen in the geopolitical situation in the West Philippine Sea and in other parts of the region. We wanted to take the opportunity, this is one of the ideas, we wanted to take the opportunity to develop the capacity of our own people in operating and maintaining a natural gas resource such as Malampaya. So one of the ideas propounded was to explore the possibility of allowing PNOCEC to operate and continue the concession. Again, Mr. Chair, this is not yet a formal position. It's just one of the options that's currently being studied today. We know about the uncertainty, again, that you mentioned. Actually, although the more or less the deadline given to us as to 2020, we are in fact mandated by the Secretary to come up with a recommendation by the end of the year. And hopefully, our recommendation would then be transmitted to the Office of the President for the President's approval by early next year. That's the plan so far. So 2020 is just a cutoff, but really the Secretary really wants to have a recommendation to the President as early as next year.
That's again, that's good news because 2020 is still 2 years from now, no? And the uncertainty between now and 2020, it's really not beneficial to the industry because you have to plan ahead. And these power plants need to look for supply and build the infrastructure to bring in those supply. So the sooner we can have a decision, the better, no, for the industry. So let me just repeat. This takeover is part and parcel of the overall study, no, whether to extend or to take over. The options here naman is to extend or to take over, no? And currently you're undertaking a study, no, to see which option will be beneficial to the government, correct? No?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
And matatapos itong study by 2018.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
This year.
The mandate of the Secretary was to have a recommendation by the end of this year, so that he could already recommend to the President by early next year.
So by fourth quarter of 2018, the study will conclude.
Yes.
And by early of 2019, there'll be a decision.
Yes, Mr.
Correct?
Chair.
Again, I just want to reiterate the position of the stakeholders. No, they were here last time, and they immediately right after our hearing, they sent me their comments, and one of the comments really is to have certainty on the supply. No, and this is again, no, hindi naman nila pinupush kung alin option, no, but what they want is to have a decision already, so they can plan accordingly. And we will also require DOE to present to us the findings of the study. We want to understand also which option is the most beneficial to the Filipino people, whether to take over or to extend. At the end of the day, it's what's beneficial to us. No? And we also want to recognize the other aspects of that benefit, no? Security, environmental consideration, so all of those will be considered. But as soon as the study is out, then we would want to be enlightened on that study. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah. Any reaction po to the
hindi,
attorney?
Mira, yung lang pong slide na nandoon para transparent tayo. Yung data ng DOE, base dito sa materials na binigay nila, average of the past 4 months, February, March, April, May. No? Kasi pag pinakita mo lang ganyan, parang yan talaga impression niya. No? Una-una yung coal, as we know, pinatawan niya ng excise taxes starting January. Excise taxes plus yung epekto ng VAT doon. So, siguro ingat lang tayo ng konti when we say na mas mahal yung coal, mura yung Malampaya, lalo na mura yung natural gas when we are only using data the past 4 months. I think we owe it to the DOE to submit a more stable, yung may stable and yung reasonable cost, no? And I don't think getting data the past 4 months will do good for the inquiry the committee is doing, Mr. Chairman. Yun lang po, no? Thank you.
With that, attorney, I think the man of the hour is here. Si Director Abad. Director, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
And kanina pa ho namin pinipiga si ASEC to explain to us the pricing, pero talagang ikaw yung inaantay niya. So, can you discuss to us this reply that you sent the committee in regards to the pricing?
With the coal, natural gas, Malampaya, diesel, and renewables, these are actual figures from the website of Meralco. These are taken out from the generation charge imposed by Meralco. What I have here is, for example, September 2017, except with the imported, ang ginawa po namin, Mr. Chair, is that dun sa imported, with the personnel na nag-compute nito, the explanation that they use the million BTU record from the Federal Energy of the US Federal Energy Fern, I think it's Fern. It's a million BTU landed cost in China. Kasi ang pinakamalapit sa atin, sir, is in China. So, ginamit yung China na kinumpute na lang siya into kilowatt hour Philippine money. Much like how do we compute with the oil price, meron po tayong basis like Platts. But in this case, ang ginagamit ay yung US website na yun to get the landed cost in China. It's not surprising, sir, that the difference between the imported and the imported price will be much lower than the Malampaya one because of the price used in the Malampaya, which was anchored with the 4 price index dun sa oil. Itong mga 2017 na study kasi naka-base na ito sa hindi Carabao to Carabao computation with Malampaya, kasi dun sa Malampaya nakaset na po yung ating price na ginamit po natin ay index Malampaya was priced applied to the gross calorific value of the natural gas using the US Consumer Price Index. The US Consumer Price Index is composed of the price on fuel oil, gas oil, Dubai crude oil, and Oman crude oil. So, hindi po siya nakapareho dun sa China na landed cost. But we choose the China based dun sa information ng nag-compute nito because ito po yung medyo malapit dun sa atin. We could discuss more dun sa detalye. Unfortunately, kami pong dalawa ay hindi po yung mga economics behind the computation. I would also admit na hindi po kami kabisado dun sa computation. But the person who computed it can actually discuss with you, sir, in details kung paano kinompute yung translation from the US landed cost per million BTU to how it was computed to kilowatt hour Philippine money.
Well, Director, you have to kasi itong tinatanong namin very basic to no. We're wasting so much time in this hearing to develop a downstream natural gas industry. Hopefully it will redound to lower electricity prices. Pero kung ang sinasabi nyo, hindi nyo alam ito, paano ho natin itutuloy itong discussion ho natin? Dahil, what's the use of developing a downstream natural gas industry kung it will not be beneficial to the consumers? So we have to go to the very fundamental reason why we're here is for the benefit of the consumers. That's why we asked for a study and a computation from DOE on how this development will help lower down electricity costs. No?
Mr. Chair, we understand the concern. When the pricing mechanism was presented to the Executive Committee of the Department of Energy, the principal fact that stood out was that the price of natural gas is very competitive with coal. And as it serves a function of a mid-merit fuel for mid-merit power plants, for us that fact was sufficient, the fact that it was competitive. Again, we'd like to request for probably an executive session to discuss how this was computed, precisely because I think some of the formulas that were used are covered by non-disclosure agreements. So we might have to ask Mr. Chair for an executive session to explain the pricing and to show the chairman the pricing mechanism that was used by our team.
Well, in one of the assumptions that assumptions that I can point out immediately, which for me is quite questionable, yung $7.75 per MMBTU landed cost of LNG in Japan, Korea, China. In one of our briefings, from one of the proponents, they disclosed to us that a landed cost here to the Philippines is about $10 to $12 per MMBTU. So malaki na kaagad yung disparity, almost double. But having said that, again, the reason why I want to discuss that here in the hearing is to, number one, put it on record, and then number two is for everyone to understand, the logic and the benefits of developing a downstream natural gas industry. Komplikado na nga ho itong industriya na ito. Pag hindi pa ho maintindihan ng mga kababayan natin, ano ba yung benepisyo sa kanila, nagsasayang lang ho tayo ng oras. No? Because at the end, and again, no, in your position paper also, in the first phase of this development are the power plants. No? And alam naman ho natin saan ba pupunta yung output ng power plant. So consumers rin. No? Everyone also, all of us will pay for this. So I just want to understand, no, the fundamental reason why we are wasting time in developing a downstream natural gas industry. And one of those fundamental reasons is the pricing. No? Magkano ba ang matitipid ni Juan de la Cruz?
Mr. Chair, of course, I think we are one in recognizing the need for the supply reliability. And we understand the concern of our consumer groups insofar as the pricing is concerned. But one of the things that we wanted to point out, Mr. Chair, the pricing mechanism that was used for the pricing of Malampaya gas is in a contract that was negotiated in the past. Currently, it's Malampaya gas is at $7.8 US dollars per MMBTU. In fact, in the world gas prices right now, it's actually lower. World LNG price is actually lower than Malampaya. And the thinking behind developing a downstream natural gas industry, again, setting aside the need to provide the supply, is scale. Scale, transition, and so on. And we feel that with the current world market prices right now of LNG, it's logical to develop the industry in the Philippines because as we reach scale, the prices would go down significantly lower. Of course, initially, it might, we feel, at least based on the projections that we've seen, initially it would be maybe at par with coal prices, but it would still be competitive. But the belief and the hope is that by developing the sector, as it reaches scale, then the prices would significantly drop.
I think all of those statements naman are relevant, no, in moving forward. But the basic, again, we have to go back to the basic. Is this a better and a cheaper option for our consumers? We've heard from the experts. EWC earlier testified that they can lower down the price, but I want to hear it from the policymaker, from the department, because the department will definitely give us an objective view and a fair view of the benefits to the consumers. So, ang tanong lang naman ho namin is very basic. Can you go back to the pricing, Judith? Will you stand by this computation? Because this computation is now part and parcel of our records, and it will be included in the transcript. So, are you going to stand by this computation?
Mr. Chair, I think we are not just of in-depth knowledge on how did the pricing section computed with the use of the formula. But what is very clear in this in the input of the formula is the 7.75 US dollar MMBTU, which was actually based on the Japan, Korea, China price index. So as of February 2018, and the 51.87 US dollar exchange rate as of that time. So taking aside with the formula, because I know the one who computed this can explain the formula. But those are the factors.
Director, kayo yung nakaharap ngayon eh. Wala
yes,
naman dito yung nag-compute.
But
kayo yung nag-submit
yes,
dito. So this is a department submission. No?
Yes, but what we're saying,
so
sir,
yun ang gusto lang naman namin, will you stand by this computation?
If you
yun
input, sir,
the
figure, we can stand by with the computation. If we're talking about the exchange rate of 51.87, I think it's based on the actual record and the 7.75. So taking aside the formula, then if you input those amounts, then it results to that one. So we stand by with the amount per kilowatt hour in
Actually,
Philippine
the
money.
next question nga for me, can you go back to the pricing, is bakit mas mahal yung Malampaya? Dito lang yung Malampaya eh. But that's our indigenous. Don't tell me we're producing our own gas, but it's more expensive than importing.
Sir, it can happen because of the fact that the basis, as I've said, the basis of the Malampaya is on the U.S. price index using the four price indexes, as I've mentioned earlier, whereas the Japan, Korea, China might not be the same with that U.S. price index.
It's because, Mr. Chair, of the contracts that were negotiated in the past.
So, Director, again, we'll put it on record that you stand by this computation, and we will use this computation as a basis to move forward in the development of the downstream natural gas industry. Because when I sponsor this to the floor, I will use your computation also. Kasi tatanungin ako, anong logic eh? I'm not the only sole decision maker here. No? There are 23 senators who will also decide on this industry. So I have to show them this computation also. No? So
Mr.
I will
Chair?
permit an executive session later on.
Yes, sir.
But siguro bago tayo mag-executive session, I want you to go back 3, 4, 5 times and look at your numbers because marami kaming numbers. Even our internal is different eh. No? Using prevailing prices is different. And I've received briefings from the other proponents. Iba rin yung nakita kong numbers. That's why when you submitted this, I was happy, but I was also quite perplexed, no? Because the briefings and our computations is really different from what you have submitted. And maybe because kayo po yung DOE, you have the entire bureaucracy doing the research and computation, baka talagang mas meron kayong privileged information. No? So we're giving you the benefit of the doubt. No? Plus, I heard from the other stakeholders some support on this computation, pero again, we're giving you some time to run this down thoroughly. Any, Ernie?
Maybe to help out, Mr. Chair, good morning. I think one of the main reasons why Camago is expensive, which has been known in the industry, is really because of the royalty fees that's being paid to government. We're the only ones that have indigenous, and yet we pay very high royalty fees. I think DOE has got the computations. Now, as far as the imported LNG is concerned, I don't know if this will be charged royalties, and I guess that's one of the main reasons why there is a difference. I don't know if DOE has got the details, Mr. Chair.
Any ASEC, meron bang doon sa circular, I don't see any royalties, no? To be imposed on imported LNG. Wala akong
There are none, Mr.
walang
Chair.
royalties. Sir? Ernie, do you have you have say po.
So, sir, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add to what Mr. Pantanco mentioned. No? The royalty on the Malampaya gas is 60%. Now, with respect to the LNG price, you mentioned that the prices of $10 to $12 per MMBTU were mentioned to you several times. But those prices were a long time ago, Mr. Chairman. For so many months or maybe a couple of years now, the LNG price has been it has been fluctuating, but has been less than $10 per MMBTU. In fact, there was even a time that it went down to maybe $5.5 per MMBTU. And this can also be, for those who want to check independently, you can look at LNG websites, you'll see these prices. So that's why really it's not far-fetched when they calculate and show a price that's cheaper than coal and maybe even Malampaya gas.
Well, for me, no, I'm not naman like I said, no, I really welcome this result, no, and it's really a good for me. It's I welcome development, And we just want to make sure that the computations and the research is very sound, no? Because at the end, this will form part of our rationale in defending this industry and this bill. No? All right. Any more questions regarding the pricing from sir?
Good morning, sir. Warren Belvis from San Miguel Global. Sir, I'd just like to comment on the period of the data where these figures were collected. I think it will be more meaningful if the trend were longer, like a 3-year period, to see if there is really movement of such. As you know, prices in the market are also dictated by indices. So the movement of the indices is very important to be able to show more meaningful data. Thank you.
Thank you for the suggestion. Any more comments on the pricing? Attorney, meron kayong comments? Again, we'll take this as it is, but we'll have, as requested by Director Abad, an executive session. But don't worry, you know, so the other stakeholders will, it's the principle of this committee to be as open and transparent to the stakeholders, especially to the consumers, in regards to the pricing. You know? So we'll definitely disclose the computation and how these prices were arrived. Another pending item from last time is the timeline of the development of a downstream natural gas industry. And there were a lot of questions as to the strategy of giving a permit to a single operator. And in the circular, ASEC, I read here in the circular, in section 1.1, no, guiding principles for evaluation, in letter C, number 1, sufficient market for natural gas to justify the construction of the downstream natural gas facility. No, I think this is really the statement that is anchored on that single operator strategy. No? And we've discussed that in length last time, but after the discussion, I receive a lot of position papers and comments from that strategy. And please expound, no? Again, once more, what do you mean by sufficient market? And how is it tied up to that single operator? No? And what is the logic for only accrediting a single operator to develop the downstream natural gas industry? No? Give us a full view and understanding of that principle.
Mr. Chair, first I'd like to clarify some portions of that statement. The statement that there's going to be a single operator for the downstream natural gas industry should be expanded to include the fact that that's merely for a certain area or a certain market. Not for the it's not the vision of the DOE that it would be one operator that we would be supporting to develop the whole value chain. Essentially, it's the fact is the challenge really was to encourage investors to come in and to assure that investor that it would be able to recover the significant capital that they would be bringing in. So the challenge really was to assure them of sustainability and commercial viability. It was really a challenge in crafting some set of rules absent a legislative framework that would be able to encourage an investor to come in and ensure that investment would be viable in the short term and in the long term. So the statement that single operator, that it's not exactly a single operator, but essentially there can be two, there can be three, but we need to ensure, that considering the amount of capital involved, that those companies or those groups that would come in would be assured of a return. And at the same time, the DOE would be assured that whatever proposal we receive would be something that would actually be able to exist or survive. And for it to survive, then they would have to have that market ready. The fact is, Mr. Chair, we're constrained by the reality that our natural gas industry has been dependent on a single indigenous source, and that market is limited to several power plants located essentially in just one geographic area. So it became the center of the challenge of drafting those rules. You would have to have a set of rules that looks to the future, but at the same time address the reality that we're facing right now. And that's why it's written that way. I understand that there is a possibility to be confused by the way it was written, but it was written that way precisely, Mr. Chair, because of that unique situation that we find ourselves in. You have several power plants in one region, but you have to write a set of rules that looks to the future.
I think what you are trying to achieve here, ASIC, is the survivability of the plants. No, I think that is one of the intention, no, of this principle, itong single operator or for lack of a better term, no, a single operator principle. But how do you now ensure the survivability of this operator or investor? How do you ensure that to them? No? How do you? It's a business, so how do you ensure? No?
Mr. Chair, may I just correct the impression that there shall only be one operator. What we're saying what we're trying to have in the one of the criteria, which is to have a sufficient market, is that you really have to define your own market. It's the perspective is not the numbers of the operator in a particular area. It's about the identification of the market. In other words, for example, if I am the operator who bagged the first gen, for example, the first gas 2,000 megawatt, and here comes another operator which is going to propose the creation of its own market, meaning he will build an integrated facility, including the power, and was able also to have a supply contract with a power supply contract to Meralco, and he was able to define its own market. Then, by all means, he can actually build another LNG regas terminal. The meaning of the sufficiency is that one of the basic requirements that we need on the financial documentation is to be able to produce and submit a feasibility study, and it's more or less a silent killer that we required the sufficiency of the market, in a sense that you need to submit a supply agreement. It's not just saying that in the feasibility study, but you have to back up your feasibility study with an actual supply agreement with the end user, for example, a power plant. And the sufficiency of that is that supply agreement should earn you revenue, which would actually provide you the fund to cover not only your costs, but your profit over the long run. So in other words, our emphasis in saying that there shall be sufficiency in market is that it does not connote that there shall only be one operator in a particular area or in a large area. For example, it can be Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. It can be in one area. It can be in Batangas. You have to define, what's important is you have to define your market. And it has to be sufficient enough, it has to be sufficient enough for you to cover your cost and your profit margin. In other words, we do not see operator by numbers. We see your market by numbers. So there's one market, another market, then they can set up 3, in fact, LNG terminals if they want to.
Let me just I'll try to put this in very understandable terms, no. So first you identify your market, correct? No? So kung ako po yung mag-apply, papakita ko sa inyo, ito yung market na gusto ko i-serve, no? And then when you identify the market, it can be any. It can be in transport, it can be in power, it can be in industrial. But it doesn't necessarily be in one location. It can be nationwide, tama? And then, second, after identifying it, what will be the deciding factor of DOE in giving the permit? Siyempre, i-identify lahat yan eh. Sasabihin nila, in power, may 3,000 plus megawatts. So ito, madali mag-identify eh. In fact, there's a lot of studies, no? The potential uses of natural gas. But now, what will make DOE decide to award that permit or not? No? What will be the deciding factor insofar as the identification of the market? Or in your words, sufficient market, no? What will be the deciding factor?
Mr. Chair, based on the documents that they submitted, the deciding factor would be the commercial viability of their proposal. So if their proposal would, in the opinion of the DOE and the belief of the DOE, would further the development of the downstream natural gas industry, and that such proposal is commercially viable, then the notice to proceed would issue.
But how do you get the assurance that the project will be viable? I mean, you could just like in any business, you know the market, but how do you get that certain level of confidence that that business, that applicant, no, will be viable in the long run? What type of assurances do you want to see?
So, sir, this is designed to be in a deregulated environment.
Correct.
So,
But by
there are
putting all of this, it becomes a regulated
but there are
business.
2 basic, at least we can call it the minimum, at least the minimum requirements for the proponent to be able to show to the Department of Energy. First is the economic feasibility report. That's I think that will be supported by 3 main agreements. So you have to prove the feasibility of your project through the submission of the 3 main agreements. Of course, yung EPC agreement mo. Pangalawa is yung LNG supply agreement mo for vis-a-vis the terminal user or the gas user. And then you have the gas sales agreement. LNG, I correct that one. LNG supply from the supplier of LNG. And then the gas sales agreement to the users of the gas. So this will more or less reinforce the use of the proof of what's inside your feasibility study report. But then the second, you have the financial closing methodology. So dito po sa financial closing methodology, ang dami pong paraan. But we made sure in Annex A, which is the guideline for the submission of documents, dapat meron kang, if you are using credit line, you have to submit that. And if you're using part of the financing scheme, not only from loan, but you have to also contribute from equity, then you have to show cash. We are even strict there in the guideline to show the cash in bank and a secretary's certificate that that cash will be devoted for the project. So these are, you know, the two main reports that they have to comply. But at the same time, that's why we are now engaging with the EPDP, with UP Diliman, to be in MOA with them, to serve as a special technical working group with the NEC, National Engineering Center, and the UP Econ, Economics. So we can be assisted of how to verify the two main reports, which is the feasibility and the financial closing methodology. More or less, those are the main reports that you have to show to the DOE and, you know, comply with the criteria on the sufficiency of the market, the viability of your project, and of course the sufficiency of your LNG supply. We made it more or less basic. We don't made it very complicated so that we can enhance the entry of the investors. We made it also very clear that by identifying your market, submission of the gas sales agreement will more or less assure the government, the DOE, that you are really engaged into a supply agreement with an end user. Because without that, it might just saturate the market, and here comes another investor, which is the capability to do it, which is the will to have the proof, even the proof of having the gas sales agreement, but is actually saddled by the entry of an advance or earlier proponent who has actually none. So we tried to have those agreements part of the submission to make sure that you are really a party who can do the job and go into business once you construct and you operate.
Director, for example, an operator wants to come in and bring in an FSRU, no? And he wants to take the risk, no? By selling, by developing his own market, pero wala pa siyang gas sales agreement. Hindi niyo siya papayagan?
Unless there's one exception, sir, unless you create your own power plant. And it's
But
your
who wants
risk.
to take the risk, eh? Why is government encroaching into the business of the proponent? He wants to take the risk. For example, meron siyang nakikita na hindi natin nakikita.
Ang ayaw kasi natin, sir, sa isang lugar, for example, mag-agawan sila at magkaroon ng cutthroat competition to the end that
But the
no one
cutthroat
actually survive.
But if you have cutthroat competition, who benefits?
It's not easy to invite, you know, investors of investment of this magnitude costing around $1 to $2 billion. If you
But
would,
we're looking at onshore. The FSRUs, they don't operate that way. In fact, the FSRUs is much more nimble and flexible, no? And the capital requirement for FSRUs are not so extensive. But then again, because of that principle, you're limiting the FSRUs or the potential FSRUs who are interested to join, no? Because nga mas maliit sila, mas flexible sila, I think they can offer a much better price, no? You can really go cutthroat, no? So why are we limiting those
sir,
type of
if they create
businesses?
also an integrated system which includes power plant, then by all means we can accept that. But if they would rely, for example, first gen, wherein first gen has already signed up to another one which has a contract, for example, of 20 years, it doesn't make sense allowing another party hoping for another contract with first gen, for example. So what we're looking at is you create your own market if you want to set up an LNG regas terminal, if you don't want to sign up with another partner which is on the power industry. But so
Mga FSRU kasi na bago much more efficient, mas maliit. So if you're going by your principle, you will now exclude the newer technologies to come in. That's what I'm trying to comprehend, no?
Ang gusto lang naman namin, sir, is that
Actually, Mr. Chair, we understand where you're coming from. In fact, that there was also a long drawn out and intense discussion within the Department of Energy and with our partners when we were developing the PDGNR. And that's exactly one of the most difficult points to answer. The truth is, we want cutthroat competition. We want that. We want a healthy, competitive market to drive prices further down. But the problem is it becomes a chicken and egg question. And that chicken and egg question involves the most important motive behind the rules and the framework that we're creating right now, which is supply. And the PDGNR was written to prioritize supply. We have, if with your permission, Mr. Chair, we actually have a joke at the Department of Energy, and the joke is really what's more expensive. What's more expensive is you don't have supply. You can afford to pay $10, $20, $30, $40, $50 per MMBTU. But if you have nobody to buy it from, then your $50 is useless. So the reason why it was written that way, Mr. Chair, is to assure that there would be an investor to come in. Because our concern is there are so many so-called proponents who have been coming to the Department of Energy and they've been sharing different forms of technologies, alleging that they would be able to solve that supply issue. But again, going back to what you said earlier, Mr. Chair, we need a certain level of confidence that these proponents will actually come in and that they will actually invest. Without that certain level of confidence, we would be left without a firm supply for the requirements of our natural gas-fired power plants. So we know it's not perfect, but that's the reason why it was written that way, Mr. Chair. We have to be able to assure a principal investor that they would be able to get back their investment. It was not meant to create a single operator. It was not meant to create any restraint in trade or a monopoly. It was just to provide some kind of framework to encourage investors to come in. And to further answer your question, Mr. Chair, legally, as a lawyer, I agree. If an FSRU were to come and pursue a market in the Philippines, legally the Department of Energy cannot stop him or that company. But
because what I understand, those people who are planning of bringing FSRU will not be allowed. Will they be allowed, or will?
Mr. Chair, it's such a general statement. But if they come in and they have a proposal and a feasibility study, and that proposal assures us that they would be commercially viable, or that they would be able to provide answers to our supply problem, then we would, of course, definitely grant them that permit.
The generator and the potential terminal, meron bang cross-ownership?
Mr. Chair, there's no
Is there a
prohibition.
cross-ownership prohibition?
Wala po, Mr. Chair. In the PDGNR, there's no prohibition.
So walang cross-ownership provision siya. There's nothing in the law that
that
limits
prohibits.
So
there's not, Mr. Chair.
if you are a potential terminal builder or proponent, and you are now mandating the contract, itong gas sales agreement, then what will be the tendency? The tendency is for the generators to also partake or co-own in the terminal. So we're now inadvertently creating a much bigger entity that will limit competition. Don't we want to have an industry wherein that marami kang maliliit na terminal supplying the different power plants rather than giant power plants also owning terminals? Because how will the other markets develop if they have to go through one single giant for the regasification needs?
Actually, Mr. Chair, when we
Kasi walang cross ownership, and in fact that is now the, if you alam niyo naman to, that is now the accusation of the power sector. Nagkakaroon ngayon ng, 'di ba, buying in of utilities, buying in into generation, because pag ako yung terminal owner, paano ako ma-assure ng gas sales? Papasukin mo na rin yung customer mo sa operation mo. And that again will create limited competition because you now have generators and terminal owners as one.
Mr. Chair, wala pa pong batas eh. So, at the same time, the experience in other countries like in Japan, they are even given a franchise area to develop everything. So, I know, I don't know if it's bad or good, but you know, sometimes when you are into this highly technical kind of industry, you tend to have a synchronization of everything based on the operation, people, standards. So that's how we look at Japan, for example. So they offered a franchise area for Tokyo Gas, for example, to develop
So
the
it's
Tokyo.
not bad to have terminal and
based on
power
the experience
plant
in Japan.
as one entity.
But it did not remove the requirements that when you go now into transmission, which are considered as public utilities, you have to get the franchise, and you will now should be covered and should be regulated.
So in your opinion, there's nothing wrong between terminal owners and power plants as a singular entity. You see benefit in that.
Nakikita namin, sir, kasi dun ang dinesign sa Japan is franchise ang focus nila eh. What is counted for on a particular area is the franchise, not the divisions of the sectors within the industry like transmission, distribution, pipeline, and the generation. Naka-franchise siya eh. So, doon diniskartehan ng operator ang lahat. Because of the, yun na nga, there should be synchronization of the operation, people, standards that use, and of course, especially the supply, sir. Kasi kailangan i-manage yung supply, saan na pupunta at paano natin i-sustain yung supply. So, yun lang. But I'm not saying, sir, na because we have no experience also that we can actually rely on to conclude na masama nga ito at baka mag-monopoly ang labas. So, but that's the experience that we can tell you on the side, for example, of Japan. So, anyway, hindi po tinanggal yung ating regulation when you look at the requirements kung nagiging public utility na siya. So, more or less, pag nagkaroon tayo ng sector sa transmission at distribution, definitely it will be, pag in-offer na to the general public, that will be considered as public utility, and therefore there's a need for the regulation.
Any comments, sir? Ernie, you wanna go ahead first? Sige, Ernie, go ahead.
I hope it's not because of age, Mr. Chair. No, just some comments just to share our discussions at the MAP Committee on Energy on these issues. No, firstly, I think the priority and concern really of MAP is security of supply. One of the major reasons for this, and this is part of our position paper, which we submitted to the Honorable Senator, Mr. Chair, is you have 3,500 megawatts of power that's currently supplying the requirements of the grid. And so what's important is that these 3,500 continue to operate. No? And I guess one of the main reasons for this is because they actually comprise 1/3 of the supply in Luzon, no? And particularly in Meralco area. I'm sure Attorney Dimagiba is aware of that. The point here is to assure continued operation. Now, clearly, I think it's pretty clear that there's still some gas left in the Camago reserves. No? So, in order for us, because we're already paying for this and under the current contracts. What's important for us is to take out all of the possible gas that is still available to help in continuing the operation of the power plants. However, we do know that the gas is limited, unfortunately. And so what happened is that there has to be a phasing in of an alternative supply. But firstly, the contract or this business sector must be assured that there is a continuing fuel supply. Otherwise, you make 3,500 megawatts stranded, or worse, if the 3,500 is made to run on diesel, that's going to be extremely expensive. And we'll end up again in an issue of supply-demand. No? Now, as far as the moving forward on the importation, what we suggest, Mr. Chair, is to let market dictate, no? Because what happens is this, no? There are some proponents that want to put up a major facility that's land-based and so forth, so on. But in the end, there's some also who want to bring in FSRUs. But in the end, what will determine which one goes through is really competitiveness in price. Because at the end result, that's still the fuel cost. And what happens is that, as you know, Mr. Chair, whenever these power companies, whether right now it's currently still First Gen or San Miguel, they have to compete and they have to go through CSP. So if they're going to import LNG, they have to make sure that their LNG facility plus the attendant fuel supply cost, etc., so forth, will be competitive vis-a-vis others. No? So the market will dictate whether that facility will push through or not. Now, currently, the position of MAP is that there must be, we think, pending discussions with the other stakeholders, is that a phasing in via FSRU is a better alternative because it's a step-by-step procedure in the importation. Now, should this be limited to 1, 2, 3 FSRUs? We think that, again, the market will dictate on that. If, for example, the newspaper articles on San Miguel and FGen, I don't know, I'm not part of, it's true, then let the two of them talk and figure out how many FSRUs they want to bring or whether it's going to be land-based, either Ilihan or so it's the private sector that will determine the direction moving forward. What we do need, we think, from the DOE, and that's part of our position paper, is that there must be some assurance that, number one, current issues are resolved. And the current issues that need to be resolved at this point in time is really, I hope, is really the COA issue. No? That's one. And the issue of San Miguel with PISAM. No? Because up to this point in time, I think that issue has to be resolved. But, I mean, San Miguel has paid for the power plant, and there is a power plant that we don't want to get stranded. That's still 1,200. So those two issues need to be resolved, and we're imploring or asking the DOE really to help resolve these issues. Now, moving forward, there is this issue now of how do we assure continuity of the withdrawal of gas from the current reserves. We know there's still available gas. Now, the point really here is that has to be the direction there, whether it's public bidding or negotiation with Camago, the SPECS consortium, is something that the DOE has to resolve in order to assure continued supply. I think what we did mention the last time is that if the consortium pulls out because there is no extension of contract, then what happens is the bank gas of PNOC, which we understand is pretty significant, will end up stranded. It will end up under the ground. And what's going to happen if nobody begins to extract that? Then what happens is that that's sunk investment. What's worse for industry, and I'm sure Attorney Dimagiba supports on this, is that we have assurance of supply. We don't have to come to 2024 and all of a sudden we're now short 3,500 megawatt, or we don't have any alternative fuel supply other than diesel. So I guess just our thoughts, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, several items. So first, because Mr. Pantanco was last to speak, so I'll just comment on what he said. No, it's very true. No? You will have at least 3,300 megawatts of existing facilities, which will not have gas if we don't develop LNG. Now, the cost to develop a terminal, let's talk about onshore, is say 1 billion or even it's $1.5 billion, plus the additional cost, incremental cost that you would have to spend on the existing facilities just to make sure that they continue to operate as efficiently, as reliably as they have been operating, is far, far less than what it would cost to construct new power plants totaling 3,500 megawatts. I think it's a no-brainer. No? Probably you'd have to spend $2 to $3 per megawatt for a new power plant. So easily that's $7 billion to $9.5 billion, as opposed to just spending $1 billion, $2 billion on the terminal and incremental expenditures on the existing assets. Secondly, there was mention of you were expressing concern, and rightfully so, about would there be a monopoly in terms of supply, no? I think we have to make a distinction between the terminal and the LNG supply. So users of the LNG would most likely actually deal with international suppliers. So the terminal would be there just to allow them to be able to import, store, and regasify the LNG. The DOE circular actually requires open access. So if there's a market and it requires use of the terminal, that's part of how the DOE addressed that question on being able to serve the requirements of additional market. Thirdly, you also talk about FSRU being very flexible, very nimble. We have been approached by FSRU providers as well. And in my experience in a lot of development projects that I handled, when people come in to make a pitch on their product, whether it's an FSRU, a power plant, or whatever, they'll say, this is how much it would cost you. But if you actually start going through the detail, the cost would probably increase 50%, 100%. Because you need to start adding, for example, how do you connect the FSRU to your facility? That's not part of the problem of the FSRU provider. You'll have to spend on the jetty, you'll have to spend on the pipeline, etc. So it doesn't necessarily mean FSRUs are cheaper, but I'm not saying they're more expensive. Although last week I just had visitors from Bangladesh. They will be having their first LNG importation this month. They put up an FSRU. So I asked them, how long did it take you to put up the FSRU? It took them 2 years from the time that they told the FSRU provider to start developing the FSRU. So that does not even include engineering work, etc. So at least 2 years. Secondly, how much did it cost you? They have very, very low capex because they only have to spend on the mooring facilities, jetties, and the pipelines. But they have to pay the FSRU provider with monthly fees for using the FSRU. And when I calculated it on the top of my head, the cost they were citing, they would be spending more than $1.5 billion for an FSRU, which is not even enough to supply the requirements of the existing gas-fired facilities here in the Philippines. So in terms of which is more expensive, which is cheaper, I think it's not automatic that FSRUs are cheaper. They could actually end up. You might have to spend less capital, but you would have to spend more on your OPEX. Also on the question on would we be better off with smaller terminals as opposed to one big terminal, I think it's just a question of, becomes a question of what do you call this, law of supply, or you have one big, because if you have a lot of smaller terminals, you would have to practically have the same fixed costs. While if you have one big terminal, then your fixed cost would be spread towards more output. No, economies of scale. So that is what I was trying to say. No? So in terms of economies of scale, it might not, we will have to have a detailed analysis as to which would really cost better for the consumers. One big terminal or several small terminals serving the requirements of the grid. And lastly, with respect to the terminal itself, because you were asking about can the owners of power plants or can the generators actually be invested in the terminals as well? I think the problem is there's no, right now, the people who are really, those that who really need the terminal are those who are generating electricity using natural gas. But there really is no, it's practically the same as putting up a new power plant. If you put up a new power plant, whether it's an oil-fired power plant or a coal-fired power plant, you would have to put up a jetty. You would have to put up a receiving facility. And that would be part of the cost that the coal-fired facility would be applying for in terms of tariff, for the electricity that they produce. In this case, the existing gas-fired facilities no longer have to put up individual receiving facilities for LNG. What will happen is you'll have one facility, one LNG terminal, where ownership might include the power generators, but I'm sure there will be others, because there are others who are interested. And that's cost. Rather than each facility spending individually for an LNG terminal, you just have one LNG terminal that's serving the requirements. So it's no different from having to put up a power plant with a separate, with its own receiving facility for its fuel. So that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Jerome. Just a basic question, no? Since we only have two major owners of gas-fired power plants, no? SMC and First Gen. For First Gen, what is the direction that you are looking at in terms of supply? No? Because you own the power plant. Obviously, after 2024, there'll be problems with supply. So what direction are you looking at in terms of assuring that you will have constant supply of natural gas?
Mr. Chairman, we've been working at First Gen in mitigating the fuel supply or Malampaya depletion risk that we've been facing. For more than 5 years now, I think we've been working on an LNG terminal, and in fact we've done a lot of work on our site for an onshore terminal that can supply not only the requirements of our power plants, but also the requirements of Ilian, and maybe even additional gas users. What is advantageous to our project is that we already have the pipeline connection between our power plants and the Ilian power plant. So these are the major users. So we don't have to spend capex on the pipeline as well. We don't have to go through the severe headache of getting right of way for a pipeline. Pipelines would easily cost $1 million per kilometer. So that's a lot of savings. And our power plants are connected already. They're already producing, so they're connected to the grid. So we don't have to spend on additional transmission capital. So we put ourselves into a position to be able to execute and hopefully get the terminal operational before 2024. But time is getting short, and that's why we are very, very supportive, firstly, of the circular that the DOE issued, and the efforts now to come up with legislation to cover the development of LNG in the Philippines, because really that is what we would need. Otherwise, we would lose more than 3,000 megawatts of electricity supply sources, and might even have to be forced to spend for brand new power plants, which would cost 3 times more expensive, at least 3 times more expensive.
The direction of First Gen is to develop its own terminal. gasification terminal?
Mr. Chairman, it's just we have to do that so that we can execute something if need be. But first, Jen, I think our president has said several times, we are looking for, we're open for people who want to partner with us on the terminal. And in fact, if somebody else gets to develop a terminal that would result to cheaper supply and therefore electricity to consumers, we would be happy to buy from that terminal.
How about to SMEC? What's same question? What's the direction of SMC?
Sir, good morning. Sir, we submitted or we are about to submit a position paper, but in advance, sir, we support, the SMC supports government efforts towards the following. Sir, the approval of the request of the SPEX to extend service contract number 38 to adjust the short-term gas requirement of the present. Number 2, ensure the continued operation of currently operating gas-fired power plants after the depletion of the Malampaya, as provided under the circular. So I would believe this is the circular. And number 3, lay down a clear policy for the upstream gas industry to locate and draw from new sources of gas for power generation and other uses. So we will support any move by the government towards the fruition of these three points, sir.
So what I want to understand the direction that SMC is undertaking in order to ensure supply of gas. No? 2024 is really just around the corner. So what are your thoughts and direction on how to make sure that you have constant supply of gas?
Sir, well, to be honest, sir, right now SMC leadership is really is an immersive study on whether or not to put up a terminal or to maybe find someone who we can source gas from, someone who has an intention of putting up a terminal. So we're still in the study process, and it's really quite immersive because, as you know, and as it was stated earlier, it's well, $1 billion is not really that easy to come by, sir.
Mr. Jerome, again, going back, in your opinion, do you think we have enough, government has enough framework to develop a constant supply of natural gas to our power plants? Ano tingin niyo pa ang kailangan natin, or do you think we have enough framework already to assure you of constant supply?
Mr. Chairman, firstly, I think the circular that was issued by the DOE is a good step, a good big step. But the initiatives to come up with legislation would definitely be much better for the industry because legislation provides stability. Because any other issuances, circulars after that would be based on what the legislation says. We do have the current draft that was being asked for our review. Draft, sorry. 765 now. While it's dealing with the downstream natural gas industry, unfortunately, it's very focused really on the pipeline, distribution pipeline, transmission pipeline, and supply. We submit that more will have to be language will have to be added, more provisions as it pertains to LNG, because LNG importation and LNG terminal operations can actually be segregated from downstream. In some industries, they're classified as midstream natural gas industry operations. So it's not, it does not cover the draft bill does not cover yet LNG importation and terminal development, construction, and operation. And we'd be very happy to participate in any technical working group discussions to help help the committee and help the Senate come up with a bill that would cover LNG as well.
Thank you. Mr. Warren, the same question. Do you think we have enough framework or enough regulation to help the stakeholders like yourselves have constant supply of natural gas?
Sir, right now, I think personally, I think it's sufficient for what we have right now. But moving forward, if we want to develop it a bit further, if you want to have a sustainable source of nat gas, I think we would have to bolster the framework and of the policies. And as with First Gen, we will gladly participate in any technical working group that could maybe come up with such policies, sir.
Thank you. Any comment from, we have KEPCO here, any comment, Mr. Choi? No comment? Well, going back, no, Director Abad, clearly there's the objective of this strategy is to make sure the survivability of the potential terminal operator. Yun yung nakikita ko dito. At the end, you want to make sure that whoever invests will survive, no? So hindi lang mabilisan. And but on the other side of the coin is really, is this the best choice for the consumers? No? Assuring the survivability might not be the best choice for the consumers because it creates distortion in the market. No? And what we really want to see is healthy competition, even playing field, and like you said earlier, cutthroat prices. No? Because it will definitely be passed on to the consumers. And we don't want a scenario wherein na hostage na naman si Juan de la Cruz by this single operator. That's why we're probing into the rationale of that strategy. We want to know further, no? Actually, dito sa circular nyo, meron ba dito na dapat i-submit yung contract, gas supply contract? Is it here? I don't see in the circular. No?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Sa annex. Yeah, sa annex na kalagay. But we want to make sure that your strategy will not create distortion to the detriment of the consumers. No? And we want to understand that. We want to understand the research that you put in, whether it's patterned after Japan, after another country. But we want to, kung ginaya natin to sa ibang bansa, so be it. No? At least there is already learning process from that country. No? And we already know the mistakes and the benefits that they had to go through in order to develop their industry. So be it. I don't discourage that. But what we want to understand is the rationale, bakit ganito. No? Because what's the signals being sent to the market is limitado na tayo sa mga may taong may kontrata. And by natural progression, kung ako my prediction of this, First Gen and Ilihan will be at a very great advantage point, no, or advantageous position to build the terminal. No? Whoever's going to invest will need both of them because silang off-takers. Kung ako man magtatayo, kaibiganin ko na itong dalawang to para mabigyan. Deregulated naman ang gas supply contract. Hindi naman kala mag-CSP yan. Diba? I'm sure they have their own bidding, but the government never required a CSP on the gas supply contract. So they have their own internal negotiations. So, but ang tinitignan ko is more on the tail end. Sila Attorney Dimagi ba? Dahil, is this the best setup for them? Yun ang tinitignan ko. Whatever the industry will have to come up with, commercial yan pero at the end, si Juan de la Cruz ang magbabayad. So that's what we want to understand. And on a later note, we want to go deeper into that by looking at your studies. Meron ba kayong feasibility? Did you undertake feasibility studies before you recommended that proposal? Meron ba kayong extensive feasibility study or consultants advising you na ito gawin natin?
Well, sir, first we have as reference the previous interim regulation, and then we took note also of the fact that like in all cases of fuel in the Philippines, be it coal, diesel, liquid fuel, even RE, are actually on the deregulated side. In fact, we are even proud that this is more or less the most regulated among the fuel as it stands now. Coal supply in the Philippines for power plants and for other boilers in the industrial side are not even regulated by anyone. Liquid fuel, much more. Sir, you always monitor the oil prices. But in case of LNG, this is even the most regulated as it is now, because we put it into perspective that whomever would be the operator would have to qualify. And
that's the point, yes, I'm making. Why are we regulating it?
Yeah, because
by deregulating it, you will enhance competition, correct?
Yes.
And when you enhance competition, prices will go down.
Yes, because sir, if we may explain, well, again, to cite the statement of Asik Pulido, it becomes a chicken and egg situation also in the department, because of the fact that the investors knows the fact that down the line there is what we call now the internal control or the check and balances. For example, on the side of the power, they have to go into CSP, and on the side of also of the transportation, we have the LTFRB for the PUVs. So in other words, what we're telling the investors, we don't guarantee anything on the side of the market. We don't guarantee you, but at the very least, you have to submit to us a feasible program. So it's very difficult for us to guarantee anything. So the least that we can do is to establish a framework which will at least provide them the basic procedure on how they can apply, what documents they need to submit, and how the department would at least ensure the public, the general public, that this operator will be responsible enough to even just qualify feasibility and financial closing, and later on, deal with the system which is now existing in the Philippines, that you have to deal with the CSP of the power sector. You just can't put up fuel LNG regas and dictate the price, for example, for the power plants, because you have to deal with them and make sure that they will also survive when they come to CSP. So in other words, it's the focus of the protection of the consumer is not necessarily in the fuel side, because that has been the case also in coal, in all other fuel. That's not the focus of the. It's being run and moved by international factors. So as mentioned by Jerome, the LNG terminal most likely will have to deal with the international concerns, and the power plant with them will have to deal with the local concerns, which will now involve the critical check and balance for the protection of the consumers, like for example the ERC for the power, LTFRB for the transport.
Pero Director, did you engage a third party independent consultant to recommend this strategy? I'm just curious, no? Because kanina sabi niyo, you don't know kung this is good or bad. Parang, on the part of DOE, parang this is an experiment, no? So, but we don't want to experiment because kawawa naman consumers natin.
Well, sir, we have, a series of
Parang
discussions.
this is your theory, but was this theory put into a test in the past? And was this theory validated by, by external experts or independent experts?
Well, sir,
I know you are an expert, no? But I'm
we
just
did
saying
not,
the
sir,
more
we did not-
validation, the better.
we did not formally have a consultant, but we have series of discussions, for example, from Tokyo Gas, from First Gen itself, from First Gen, and then we conducted also consultations, but we referred also to the previous interim rules, and we took note really, sir, of the fact that the principles behind the supply value chain in the Philippines for all kinds of fuel are really deregulated. So,
Bakit nga rin
Opo.
i-regulate to kung
well, on the aspect only that we want also to put on some kind of a little bit of assurance to the investors that you need to be feasible. That is for your own good. You need to have contracts, for example, to ensure that you will survive in the Philippines. This is more of making sure that the LNG terminal, but at the same time, I won't forget the statement that we made it mandatory to have an open access, sir. So at the same time, while we're trying to to compensate for the non-guarantee on the market side for the investors, because we cannot guarantee the market for any investor in LNG, but at least we tried to put on requirements that you have to design your project to be feasible. You have to have a financial closing which is acceptable to you. But at the same time, we made sure that it should be an open, it should be compliant to an open access system, so that Ilihan, for example, may be able to use, even if they don't put up their own LNG terminal, may be able to use the terminal, for example, of First Gen. And
Director, this is a strategy that the Department of Energy is now embarking. And we want to understand, this committee wants to understand, as well as the other stakeholders understand, what is the logic of this strategy. At the end, at the heart of it, the most fundamental reason, again, is how will it save the consumers in the long run. No? That's what we want to understand. Because from what I pag nakita nyo yung aking nasa isip is I'm not very confident whether this is going to redound to cheaper electricity to the consumers. This is a strategy that maybe in the short term, in the medium term, maybe it will help the survivability of that plant. But again, is that the best for the consumers? No? At the end kasi consumer na naman magbabayad nito no? And ayaw naman natin na consumer ang sumasalo because the strategy was not well thought of or not tested. No? Ayaw naman natin ng ganyan. So that's what I want to understand fully. No? And I
Mr.
want
Chair,
you to
this is no different than the fuel from coal. We set it in the EPIRA to be deregulated. That's the whole point. So, in other words, if
Right. It's well, anyways, paulit-ulit tayo well, just give us submit to us later on, again, a very detailed analysis and argument on why this was the strategy that DOE chose. No? I understand, I can see the logic, but let's put it again, no? I-break down natin. Short term, is it good for the consumers? Medium term, is it good for the consumers? Long term, is it good for the consumers? At the end kasi yan ang paulit-ulit ako, but because that at the end is really the most fundamental reason why we are all here, no? To make sure that the consumers get the best choice. No? We'll peg a date on when you will submit that. No? Just to move forward, We also have one more topic, which is the Senate Bill 765. And we want to hear your comments. We will not discuss the bill one by one, but we want to get the comments of DOE as to the concept set forth by the House bill, or the Senate bill. This is authored by Senator Chis Escudero, and it focused on regulating the transmission and the distribution of natural gas. This is purely on a downstream. But tama si Mr. Jerome, din nakita namin na sort of we can improve, no, which is the midstream, the terminal aspect. But we want to hear your comments on this concept and what are the things that we can do to further improve and use the bill. No? As Mr. Jerome also said earlier, one of the incentives that we can give the industry is to have legislation that is stronger and a lasting legislation that can help the development of the industry. So, any comments, ASEC?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, yes.
Bago lang po yan, medyo lumabas ng kote. Just want to hear the answer of our friends from First Gen and SMC in fairness to DOE. In your study of whether you should put up your LNG terminal, did you also study the possibility of retrofitting? I am using the word retrofitting, no, in layman's way. The power plant to use other energy resource in terms of, will it be more expensive than just put up an LNG terminal, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman. Okay, well, the power plants, LNG is just a form that you transport natural gas. So what the terminal would do is to receive the LNG, store it, and then regasify it. So the moment it's regasified, it becomes natural gas that's similar to Malampaya gas. So in terms of being able to burn the gas, of course, subject to meeting the same specifications, there really is no retrofitting required. But what I did mention in terms of comparing with putting up a brand new power plant is that our existing power plants have been very well maintained, and the major components like the gas turbine, for example, can still operate for easily at least 20 more years. But we do have to spend. It's like parang kotse, no? If you have a car, maybe you don't need to replace the engine, but some parts you might have to replace, radiator or yung fan belt mo. No? So that's what we're doing as well. So we have ongoing studies to determine which components would have to be replaced at some point so that the power plant can continue to operate for 20 more years, 25 more years. And the way we're doing it as well is that we do have major outages scheduled for the power plant because power plants, parang kotse rin, after 5,000 kilometers, 10,000 kilometers, you have to have a major maintenance. Power plants, same way. After so many hours of running, you have to open the turbines up, or open the power plant and then inspect. So what we're doing is we're trying to determine which components would need to be replaced or improved or worked on so that we can extend the life of the whole power plant beyond this existing contracts expiration of Malampaya and our PPA. So it's no different from when you're doing a car maintenance. So dahil tinignan mo na, nakita mo na, itong brake pad, hindi pa palitin, pero sobrang nipis na siya na, hindi na siya abot sa next major maintenance, palitan na natin ngayon. Because otherwise, kung hintayin mo lumipis siya at the time na kailangan na siyang palitan, doble gastos. Kasi bubuksan mo na naman siya. So, ganun lang yung ano. So, that's why when we say we would have to spend it, but it's going to be far less than you would have to spend in putting up a brand new power plant.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we now move into the second topic, which is Senate Bill 765. ASEC, any comments? as to the concept?
Mr. Chair, the initial recommendation really of the Department of Energy is when we looked at the Senate bill, we saw that it, of course, it was drafted much earlier. I think the first version was back in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, 2016, sorry, 2015. It assumes, it doesn't take into consideration the depletion of Malampaya. So it's the first recommendation or the first impression that the Department of Energy has is that it should have importation of LNG, which is the midstream, taken into consideration. Mr. Chair, that's where the opportunity is to marry of course, to refine the PDGNR, the natural gas rules that was drafted by the Department of Energy, and integrate that with Senate Bill number 765. So that because the DC already contains a lot of ideas or a lot of frameworks for midstream, for the importation of LNG. The other recommendation that the Department of Energy has upon studying 765 is if we could provide incentives not only to encourage investors to come in for the midstream portion of the value chain, but also to encourage existing petroleum-fired or petroleum-fueled facilities to convert to gas-fired or natural gas-fired power plants and other infrastructure, Mr. Chair. We also would like to take that as an opportunity to put provisions that would address the growth of other sectors. Currently, the way it's written focuses on power generation. And of course, the DOE wants to push for the use of natural gas in other sectors, transportation, industrial, and so on. The other recommendation of the DOE is to have third-party access all throughout the value chain, from midstream to all the way to the transmission and distribution utilities, in order to encourage the participation of other companies into the value chain. Another thing that we noticed, Mr. Chair, that the Senate bill lacks would be to provide for some sort of funding mechanism for very critical, very large-scale projects such as pipelines that our third-party investors might not be willing to undertake. We believe that some portions of the infrastructure required to develop a downstream natural gas industry might have to be shouldered by the national government because the private sector might not be willing to undertake that investment. And finally, Mr. Chair, we do agree with the way it was designed. As you mentioned earlier, two of the things that are similar with the EPIRA is that the SB divided it into several sectors, and we agree with that, with the way it was designed, that it should be divided. And the other thing is that we agree with the way that the Senate bill separates the functions of the DOE with the ERC. We believe that the ERC has a better competency insofar as determining the proper rates, tolling rates, rates for the generation, and so on, insofar as natural gas is concerned. But we do believe that the non-price regulation and the entry regulation should remain with the Department of Energy, considering that it already complements the functions that the Department of Energy is already performing. Those are the initial impressions of the Department of Energy, Mr. Chair. Again, we'd like to ask for more time to, if with your permission, we'd like to submit an integrated version, and we would be more than willing to work with your office to come up with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Asek. And I'd like to do what I call a reverse TWG, in which let's work together already, so that before we even go to the TWG, we would now have the detailed proposals already, as opposed to the other way around, no? Kasi humahaba yung time, no? So we'll work outside of the TWG hearing so that we can include whatever we need to amend or to include. All right. With that, I'd like to get the comments of everyone, no? And like to get the comments of Ernie in the map regarding the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're still currently studying and discussing it with the Committee of Energy, Mr. Chair. So we'll just submit it as soon as we're completed. But as of this point in time, we were really concentrating on the previous bill, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, sorry.
What was the previous bill?
No, the bill 69, the
resolution.
the resolution,
Okay.
sorry.
All right.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Mr. Chair.
ERC, Director Sharon.
Yes. First of all, Mr. Chair, we thank the chair and of the Committee on Energy for inviting ERC to this hearing. We fully support the bill because it emphasizes our role as the sole regulatory body responsible for establishing the rates, including the related terms and conditions of service for the sectors identified. This is comparable to the downstream oil industry previously regulated by our predecessors, the Board of Energy and the ERB, the Energy Regulatory Board. And we just want to note, and we have also submitted this to the House on a similar bill on the cross-ownership limitation and market share, that we propose that this bill should include these provisions to be applicable to natural gas, the same provisions in the IPIRA. We also noted that there is no provision on consumer welfare protection, which is also part of the ERC's mandate in the IPIRA. Mr. Chair, these are our initial comments, but we will be submitting comprehensive comments.
Director, I would like you to take note of the competition aspect, no? Tama si Asek Pulido na I think when this was being drafted, PCC was not created or was not even being thought of, no, in the past. But if you notice, it has a very robust provision on competition being delegated to ERC. But we all know right now, with the advent of PCC, nagkakaroon ng konting, and let me be honest, turf war, no, when it comes to competition in the power sector. So we want that to be cleared in this bill, no, because baka in the future sasabihin ng PCC jurisdiction namin yan, and we want to be very clear, no, in this bill. But I can sense that PCC wasn't even being thought of, no, when they were drafting this bill.
We will include our comments, our position on the issue on competition, Mr. Chair.
Right. Thank you, Director. Ms. Belinda, any comments? I know nasa upstream kayo, no, but
Yes.
I think in your last briefing to us, you also have very extensive knowledge with the downstream, and that's what we want to pick your experience of your international exposure, no? So I want to get your opinion regarding this.
Thank you for inviting us here. Particularly for 765, we have no particular comment on this bill yet, and we have yet to study it extensively. But in terms of energy and what the DOE is trying to do, the consortium is bent to make sure that we supply energy from Malampaya as safely as possible and as long as possible. And what we encourage the DOE to do also is to look into the energy supply into the future, because we are seeing that expanding, and if the studies are true, that LNG would come out to be cheaper, then there should be a policy from the DOE that at least to encourage suppliers or investors to get into the LNG business, because that is what we need as of the moment in terms of a policy, is what is our energy mix, and and it is not very clear as of the moment, and there is no, and that is what is needed by the industry on a personal basis. So if we can do that, that would be good. So in terms of making sure that investors stay, is again contract sanctity is very important, and if we could have that also, that would make investors stay, because that is what the Philippines I think really needs right now, is to ensure that we have investors to come in and stay and trust the government to abide by what has been agreed upon in contracts that has been already been said.
That was also echoed by Ernie earlier, no,
That
the
is
sanctity
correct.
of contracts.
That's correct.
Belinda, since you opened up the topic again on Malampaya, I just want to go back, no, and understand if ever government takes the track of PNOC taking over the service contract, no? So what will be the subsequent activity of Shell, no, in this case?
I cannot comment on that as of the moment,
mo
and
pa
we
alam.
will have to.
Hindi gusto ko sana malaman kung obviously tatanggalin ni rig, di ba? Ano ba yung mga technical aspect? Kasi yung
Hindi naman.
yung pipe is also owned by Shell, correct?
It is
From Malampaya to
correct.
That's also owned by the consortium, no?
By the consortium.
So I just want to know subsequently, ano ba yun, baka tanggalin ni rig, yung mga ganun ba, no? I'm not a oil man, no, but I've been to the
that DOE and the consortium probably talk about it
Okay,
also, because
alright.
we have not really received formal notation that as the DOE said, they're still looking at other options on how to go about what will happen after 2024, and we will be happy to work with them to provide some insight on that.
Can you discuss the subsequent activity?
No, I
You're
have
not,
no idea, and I'm not positioned to talk about any subsequent activity.
Alright. Thank you, Belinda. Thank you. Mr. Elliott, any comment on Senate Bill 765?
Mr. Chairman, at the moment we don't have detailed responses for Senate Bill, this particular Senate bill, but we will be looking at it. Obviously, as a foreign investor and as an investor who has put approximately $750 million into the Philippines into a LNG hub terminal project and power generation facility, any legislation that strengthens opening up competition and opening up gas supply throughout the Philippines, we are in favor of. I think one thing that we may really need to step back and look at a little bit with this hearing as well is not just the continuity of the existing 3,000 megawatts of power generation currently reliant on the gas from Malampaya, but the Department of Energy's own figures that over the next 20 years, there's something like a need for 43,000 megawatts of new power generation. Of that 43,000 megawatts, even if we conservatively say 1/3 is coal, 1/3 is gas, and 1/3 is renewables, that means we're looking at a situation where we need 14 to 15,000 megawatts of gas-fired power generation in addition to anything that's already existing. And that will support a very large LNG industry throughout the Philippines. I mean, that will require the construction of at least 2 to 3 more terminals the size of the one in Pagbalao. So we really see that it's the growing energy demand of the Philippines over the years that will drive the importation of LNG. So from a regulatory point of view, as long as the government is making sure that safety is regulated for and that fairness and openness to bring in the product and move it around, that's where we're really looking for the government to take its role. I mean, they need to protect the population by ensuring that everything in the industry is done in a safe and professional manner, which they are doing. We feel very well. It's a little bit concerning on the previous discussions that the DOE is perhaps taking a economic decision on people's decision to invest, when, as you said, it is the investor's decision to risk that. business and hope for the growth. So we would like to see perhaps less of that, but more of just the safety and certainty of the actual product and the facilities. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Mr. Jerome?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned earlier, we hope that we can also have more provisions on the bill regarding LNG importation and terminal construction, development, construction, and operation. But we'd like to express that we fully support the initiatives to come up with the appropriate law to cover natural gas industry development in the Philippines, not just downstream, but including LNG importation. We would support the legislative measures that champion the increased use of natural gas within a diversified energy mix, including incentivizing off-takers to choose natural gas and encourage development of project financeable LNG terminal and infrastructure. We also hope that the bill would put in place provisions that would educate and ultimately help convert existing end users from their more polluted energy sources now to natural gas. And we'll be very happy to assist, participate actively in any technical working group that would be established by the Senate Energy Committee on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jerome. Mr. Warren?
Sir, we we concentrated on the first Senate bill, number 699, even with our position paper. But seeing as, if I'm not mistaken, this bill somewhat would like to shadow NGCP or Transco. Is that how it's interesting? And we would probably participate. We would like to be able to be granted participation, sir, in the development of any policies regarding this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Attorney Dimagba?
Sorry.
Pareho ba kayo? Magkasama ba
No,
kayo?
sir. I'm with Citizen Watch.
Okay. See.
Sir, we're currently drafting our inputs and position about the topics, and we will send it to the committee soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Kala ko bago ang lawyer mo, Attorney Dimagba eh. Attorney.
Pwede rin siya mag-join ng laban consumer. On Senate Bill 765, Mr. Chairman, on the provision on taxes, Section 29, hopefully those incentives given to the developer be passed on to the benefit of the consumers. No? And also, because of our lesson on the excise taxes, maybe we should already not consider the section that says the commodity price of gas shall be the only component of the gas retail rate that be subject to excise taxes. Siguro po wala na dapat excise taxes dahil naturally pass on na naman yan doon sa per kilowatt hour. I-maintain na lang natin yung magandang data ng DOE showing that Malampaya gas rate at the moment is the cheapest. Yun lang po.
And Attorney, can you take note? I think si Director Sharon raised this earlier, yung mga consumer protection provisions, no? Na-note ko rin sa sarili kong notes na walang mention of consumers, no? Maybe you can help us craft some provisions that will somehow protect the consumers or benefit the consumers through this bill.
Sure.
Yeah, meron kasi tayong downstream eh. Meron tayong distribution. So, I think it's envisioned here na at maybe one day, no, it will reach the household level, no? And meron tayong supply industry here that also at one point in our lives probably go directly to the household level, no? So, yun ang nakita kong kulang dito.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
NPC, any comments ho?
Well, we have just started studying these various Senate bill or resolutions. So we'll be submitting our comment
Thank you.
if there are any.
Thank you. PNOC, meron kayong comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As of this moment, we share the same comments as already stated by the resource person present here, and we fully support the OE's initiatives on this PDGNR. And we also recognize the initiative of the lawmakers in very actively pursuing this new industry in the Philippines. But at the end of the day, we just have to balance between security of energy and the price of LNG, which we believe will still benefit the country, not immediately, but in the future. Thank you.
Correct. That's what I want to understand nga. No? I can see I will call it short-term sacrifice in order for a long-term stability. But we want to understand the logic of that, no? And run some models and simulation on that sacrifice and benefit. No? Dahil, again, no, when we face the people, we have to know the exact numbers that justifies or that warrants the strategy. No? But Ma'am Glenda, I want to same question kay Ms. Belinda, because there's a recommendation that PNOC will take over, correct? The service contract. Ano ba yung mga activities subsequent to that? Do you have any idea? No? Kasi ang na-envision ko, pag you take over the contract, aalis sila. Sino nga yung hihigop nung
Actually, to answer you point blank, this is the first time that we hear that PNOC our
talaga?
subsidiary. But
Well,
we have been hearing it from a distant. But I believe the government is ready to take over the Malampaya operations.
But what you know nga, what are the activities?
On the activities,
on the
sir,
technical aspect?
sir, there's nothing yet definitive on that aspect.
Well, well, once the study concludes, which is end of the year, we will request ASEC Polido to give us a detailed briefing on that, both on the commercial aspect, the technical aspect of the recommendation. Hopefully, bago mag-decide si Presidente, we will understand it. We will not, of course, not be in the way of the decision, but we want to understand that fully. No, all right. Mr. Choi, any comment? No comment. NGCP, Attorney Aktub.
Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Chair. NGCP is looking at the various bills from a technical standpoint, just to ensure that the impact of these bills, once it becomes a law, whether there would be an increase in the demand on one hand or increase in supply on the other hand, will be accommodated by the grid. And there is already sufficient guidelines, both external and internal, that will cater this in ensuring that this will be accommodated by the grid. We've been closely coordinating with the Department of Energy as far as where are the potential sites for these additional supplies can be located, so that hand in hand we'll be able to address it through our transmission development plan, Mr. Chair.
Do you want to comment on the EWC status? I think the one of the problems is really connecting to the grid. No?
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair. It is correct, Mr. Chair, that as early as 2015, Mr. Elliott, if I'm not mistaken, both parties have already come to an agreement that the first 200 megawatt of Energy World's output will be accommodated through a cut-in of our existing Tayabas Naga line. This is a fairly long line. Imagine on the end of the line is coming from Naga, and the other end is in Tayabas. So we already have an agreement, a connection agreement, to be specific, that NGCP will be able to accommodate the first 200 megawatt of Energy World, with Energy World taking care of the line from its location of the power plant to the nearest structure that will technically cut the Naga and Tayabas line. Eventually, the first 200 megawatt will be accommodated by the Tayabas substation, wherein there is already a limited ability to accommodate additional capacity, because if you can imagine, the Tayabas substation not only caters the new capacity to be injected by Energy World, the Tayabas substation currently also accommodates the capacity injected by the Team Energy. Its first 200 megawatt, and more recently with the commissioning and commercial operation of its additional 400 megawatt. So recognizing that, NGCP in fact has already is already starting to develop a new pagbilao, wherein both parties, Energy World and NGCP, has also agreed that once the new pagbilao will come into operation, then the entire output of Energy World can actually be accommodated, but it will just have to be transferred by Energy World again from the existing, or from the initial connection, which is a cut-in of the Naga and Tayabas line, accommodating 200, that Energy World will just have to transfer the connection to the new pagbilao once it is already already operational, Mr. Chair. That was the agreement way back 2014 or 15, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chair.
Attorney, understand it correctly. By end of the year, 200 megawatts will be injected into the grid.
We've been ready for the first 200 way back 2014, Mr. Chair.
2014?
Yes,
okay.
Mr. Chair.
Well,
we've been ready to accommodate the first 200 megawatt of Energy World.
Okay,
There was no
well,
problem insofar as NGCP is concerned.
so as far as connection to the grid, there's no problem?
For the first 200.
For the
Mr.
first 200.
That's
And
correct, Mr. Chair.
may I ask, kailan yung, kasi ang capacity nila 600 eh. Again, my interest here is because of the low price that Mr. Elliott quoted. No? So, kailan pwedeng pumasok yung the next 400?
Based on our timeline, Mr. Chair, if everything goes according to plan, the new Pagbilao substation will be available at the first half of 2020, Mr. Chair.
First half of 2020?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So they can inject the next 400 first half of 2020?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Tagal pa, ah. And that's because you are expanding the capacity of the grid.
Yes, Mr. Chair. This is a fairly large substation, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
This is one of the few 500 megawatt substation, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank
That
you.
already, the 2020 target already includes any slippage, Mr. Chair, because we are also dealing with the perennial problem of rights of way. We know for a fact that assuming that the landowners affected will be cooperative, then this may the completion of the project may come early. But if we bring this to, if this will end up in courts by filing eminent domain, then the control, Mr. Chair, will have to be monitored, because we'll have to rely on the how fast the courts can actually finish the cases, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Attorney. Any last comments regarding Senate Bill 765? Meron tayong mga last comments. Okay. Kung wala naman po, well, I just need, we just have some request, no, from the stakeholders and from the body. Number one, and I would like to reiterate this again since Mr. Elliott is already here, and I was surprised, no, in his statement earlier that EWC can sell electricity as low as 2 pesos and 75 pesos per kilowatt hour. So obviously this is a lot of savings for the consumers, and we'd like to request DOE and ERC to assist EWC. No, dahil nandyan na sila eh. No, it's already there. It's I've seen personally I haven't been, no, but I've seen a lot of pictures, no. And I plan to visit also EWC to further enhance my learning in natural gas. And at the same time, it will be the first natural gas terminal and power plant of the country. So it's also to our interest to learn the benefits and also the mistakes of that project. But we will only learn if they are up and running already. So I'd like to request DOE and ERC to take note and assist EWC and also NGCP, no. And at the same time, I will take the proposal for executive session on the pricing, Director. I would like to go deeper into the methodology of your pricing submitted to this committee. At the same time, I would like to also request for that feasibility study or research that you conducted in order that research you conducted to propose, no, this one single operator strategy, no, again for lack of a better term, no, this strategy that you propose to have a constant supply of market or a one operator type of strategy for the downstream natural gas, no. I'm sure you conducted a lot of research, you conducted a lot of studies, and we would like to go deeper into that, no. I will not put a time frame, alam ko madugo yan, but sabi nyo kasi kanina wala kayong third party na kinuha, so this is purely internally researched, and we want to understand and be guided accordingly. At the same time, that should also redound to consumer benefit, no? What savings can we deliver to the consumers? And lastly, the position paper of everyone, no? Regarding Senate Bill 765. We'd like to get your opinion and your suggestions how to improve Senate Bill 765. Please submit your position paper to us on or before June 29, which is 2 weeks from now. We're giving ample time because this is such a complicated proposal. With that, I think we've covered almost everything about natural gas. We will await for the decision of DOE as to what track to take, you know, in regards to Malampaya, whether Malampaya will be extended or will be taken over by PNOC. We will wait for the study and we will request for a presentation. Any final words from the body? Any final words po? If not, then once again, thank you very much for your participation. We will appreciate your comments on this bill because this will be ultimately the guiding bill that will develop natural gas here in our country. So we would really welcome any comments and suggestions. With that, thank you very much po. Meeting is suspended.